let's have the conversation. Jake it or leave it has commented a few times in the chat that, Book just has not shown up in elimination games. B said we have to have an honest conversation about that. Where do you guys stand when it comes to this topic? Because I know it's pretty divided.
I will defer to the senator from New Mexico.
Okay, go ahead and we'll get into it.
All right. I want to preface this by saying that I am in no way saying that Book has not been terrible in these in these scenarios. Like, if you look at the numbers, if you include last night's in-season tournament game as one of these elimination games, do or die games, he's averaging 15.8 points, 5.3 assists, and 4.5 rebounds, almost 5 turnovers. He's shooting 32% from the floor, 13% from three, and it's a minus 81 total point differential when he's been on the court in those 4 games. 0-4, obviously.
God damn, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but
They're terrible numbers. Hold on. Let me keep going. They are terrible. But I will say that the concept in general of elimination games is a tad over romanticized.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because obviously it's an important and useful thing to have a player that can come through when your team's back is against the wall. And right now, Devin Booker has not shown us that he's been able to do that. But do you know how many of the last 44 NBA champions didn't have to play a single elimination game during their playoff run? Almost half of them, 21 of them, didn't have to play a single elimination game. So
6
over
of those
those
were Jordan.
over those 4, no, Jordan actually played in one of them. Over those 44 seasons, the eventual NBA champion played an average of 1.04 elimination games. So it's one of those things where, like, it's either a do or die game 7, or if you are in a situation where your team could be eliminated, you're probably not going to win that playoff series anyway. You are probably playing a team that is overmatched, that is better than you, and you're probably going to win. That's why we do these best of 7 series, because 90% of the time, the better team will win out over the course of a 7-game series. The thing with this is that Book is not going to beat these allegations until he wins a championship. And that's just the blatant truth of it. Like, nobody thinks about the fact that Michael Jordan actually has a losing record in elimination games for his career. He was 6-7. Why? Because he was the winningest player in the finals outside of Bill Russell in terms of 6-0, indomitable winning personified. Nobody talks about Kobe being 9-10 in elimination games, KD being 6-9, Tim Duncan being 8-13. And a lot of these guys' numbers significantly dropping in those games. It's because elimination games are often with your back against the wall and you are overmatched and you're probably not going to win. And we could make excuses for Book all day. You know, the Bucks series, he was dealing with the hamstring thing. The Nuggets series, he was dealing with the foot thing from Game 5. The Mavericks series, the whole COVID rumors that we heard about that. But this is why I hate like ring culture, because we don't appreciate players for what they are until they get over that hump. And I understand that like you have to win a title to solidify yourself among the all-time greats. But the truth is, if you are a championship caliber team, you should be up in the series. That's what happened when we saw the Suns get to the finals. They didn't face an elimination game until the very end, and that was 1 game. He's played in 3 elimination playoff games. Like, all of these guys that I'm mentioning with losing elimination game records have all played 15 to 20 games. The guy's 27 years old. He's going to have time. And even if he's not that number 1 guy that can lead you to a title, a pretty good way to make up for that is by pairing him with Kevin freaking Durant, who is good enough, has shown that he's good enough to be the 1A on a championship team. So as much as Booker has not been good in elimination games and has to prove it, I do think this idea that he has to be is missing the point. Like, if this is a championship caliber team, they shouldn't be in those situations anyway, half the time.
No, and last night wasn't an elimination game. I mean, come on. I get it. It was a 1 game, but that's not you've gone through a grueling playoff series. You don't show up in a deciding game, whether it's fair or not to say that. This was not an elimination game like that. But you're right. You can't get past that until you get over the hump. But what I'd be more concerned about is if he was missing all sorts of clutch shots at the end of elimination games, and it was like a big moment thing where he wasn't coming through when you had a chance to win. They've gotten their asses kicked, and that's a team thing.
Right.
That's not one guy. Devin Booker wasn't going to make up the at one point 50-point ass kicking you were taking to the Mavs, right? Like these were fundamental team issues that fell apart. I mean, you could argue maybe in the deciding Bucks game, a little bit more Book gets you to force a game 7, but the other two, the Book wasn't making the difference. That was a large team failure, a catastrophic failure in both cases.
Okay, so I hear you guys, and I think you guys all make valid, points for sure. I think Devin Booker is held to a different standard, and I think when you're looking at Devin Booker, I don't even care about winning a championship. I'm just talking about like, what do you look like in these situations? And I don't look at Devin Booker in any one of the situations, whether it be the finals, the Mavericks, the Nuggets, or even last night, and feel like he came with it, right? Like if he had performed at a high level and they still lost, then I could swallow that. I could be fine. But the problem is, and as Gerald's stats point out, is like he's not even showing up half the time. Like you got to be there and do your part. And I don't feel like he's really doing that at all in those elimination games. And I don't really care if you want to count last night as an elimination game or not. But last night, if you want to consider that, he didn't look right. He didn't look right at any point in time in that game. And that's concerning because you have to show up for your team, especially when everybody in your city is tabbing you as the face of the franchise and possibly the best player to ever come through Phoenix. Like you got to show up. And so that's my thing. It's like, yeah, I get it. Like Michael Jordan, same thing. Like, and he went time after time, but I would like to see what Michael Jordan's stats were in some of those elimination games, because I would just say that he showed up in a lot of those things. He just didn't have the team to really do it. That's why they lost a lot.
Right.
Like, and so again, like if Devin Booker dropped 35 last night and had a normal Devin Booker game, I'm not sitting here talking about that. If he did that at any point in time in any of those 3 other games in the playoffs, same thing. But the last 2 in the playoffs, they were so far out of it before we even got to halftime. It's like, does it even count? Well, it does, because you got to show up from the start. And that's what I am a little bit more disappointed in. And it's not even like I don't think he's going to ever come through. I don't think that. I think at some point he will. But in the games that he has played, he has not looked like the standard that he set for himself. And that's the most concerning part for me. Is like, bro, why do you look different in some of these games? I don't know if it's COVID. It's the hamstring or whatever, right? Like the foot, get it. All right, cool. But if you step on that court and you're ready to go, you got to give something. And I don't feel like he's really given much of anything in those games.
No, I completely agree. But again, this is a 4-game sample size we're talking about if you're talking about the in-season tournament and including that in there. To your point, like MJ's stats were way better in elimination games, but there was still that narrative about him until he broke through and won a title, that he was just a scoring leader, that he couldn't elevate his teammates, make them better. He couldn't win. Like we do this with every fucking superstar player that comes in the league, every single one. And it's why Kevin Durant went to join the Golden State Warriors in the first place, because people would talk shit about how he couldn't lead the Oklahoma City Thunder to a title on his own. He couldn't do it on his own, so he had to join somebody else. Like we take it upon ourselves to define what players' legacies are. And every time we did this with Giannis and Nikola Jokic a couple of years ago. And then as soon as they won a title, it was, oh my God, they're 25 greatest players of all time automatically. Like, why do we put so much on that one thing? And I think elimination games, if you win a title, who gives it? He could go 0-10 for his career in elimination games. If he wins a title, he wins a title and he goes down as arguably the greatest Sun of all time. So I think we're losing our focus here. He has to be better in these situations. Like we all agree on that. There's no denying that. These numbers are not going to cut it. But my thing is, if you are a championship caliber team, you're not going to be playing in elimination games. You are going to be eliminating people like he did when he dropped 47 on the Lakers, like he did in the Bucks series when he was trying to get that 3rd win and dropped 40 in back-to-back finals games and didn't have help around him to get him over the hump. Like my thing is we focus on this 3-game sample size and forget all the shit that he did in the playoffs, all the good stuff, all the closeout games that he's had. They're just different conversations because you're not good in elimination games, which every player in NBA history for the most part doesn't have a good record, their stats go down, that doesn't define who you are as a clutch or a playoff performer to me.
Do you think this should be a bigger conversation that we're honing in on Devin because it's easier to look at him specifically, but should it be bigger from a team organization perspective where we rely so heavily on what Devin does that if he has a game like this, there's a good chance we lose that game?
My perspective isn't even about that. My perspective is solely on Devin Booker and his performance. That's just me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's solely on Devin Booker and his performance and how he played. And he's played shitty in 4 of these games, right? Like, he has not played to his standard. He did not play to his standard that he set even in the same series. Now, I know he hurt his foot against the Nuggets, and he had one of the most efficient scoring runs of all time as a guard. Like, I totally get that. But when your team needed you the most, he had the injury on the foot, the hamstring, COVID. I don't know, and I don't care because you're on the court. You gotta show up a little bit more than you have, and that's what I'm looking at. Like, I know Michael lost multiple times against the Pistons, but he showed up in those games.
Can we stop with the Michael Jordan comparison?
Okay, let's talk about Steph Curry. Let's talk about Steph Curry. Let's talk about a lot of these guys that have gotten eliminated in the playoffs in elimination games. But they stepped up and they did play, and they played at a high level. It's just their teams were not good enough to win championships. And to Gerald's point, that's why you're in an elimination game, because your team is not good enough. But that's 2 things that are not working right now. The team's not good, and Devin Booker's not playing good, and that's my issue.
No, I agree. And the Michael Jordan thing wasn't on you. That's the default everybody turns to when they talk about greatness, and nobody's living up to Mike. But I think it's fair.
No, but I think from Gerald's perspective, if you're using the stats to show that even Michael Jordan had struggles in these certain areas and nobody's living up to that, how can you know what I mean?
I just meant stat lines in those things. But nobody lives up to Mike.
But that's the thing, is it's not just Mike. Like, I named Kobe, KD, Tim Duncan, Kawhi Leonard, Magic Johnson, Shaquille O'Neal, who was 6-12, Kevin Garnett, Kareem, all losing records in elimination games. And some of those guys put up great numbers still. Some of them did not. Tim Duncan was averaging like 22 points a game on like sub 50% shooting in those games. It's one of those things where, again, like, if you're in an elimination game, there's a good chance you're playing a team that's better than you in a best of 7 series. Like, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses for Book or say that, what he's done, it's okay, don't worry about it. They need him to be better when their back is against the wall, because a lot of these champions have had to play in an elimination game to get that ring at the end of the season. My thing is, like, if you pair him with Kevin Durant, the hope is that 2 top 10 players is going to be enough, because we know Kevin Durant has great experience. He's averaging damn near 30 points a game in elimination games. So even if Book is not that guy that's going to carry you in that scenario, like, you have Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal to kind of safeguard against that. That's the hope.
So we have a couple super chats around this one. Psycho Blue sent us one and said, Book saved our hides in the Grizzlies elimination game. We wouldn't be in this tournament without him. 1-3 in elimination games. I don't think the Grizzlies game counts as an elimination.
I don't think any of these count.
What do you
that
mean?
was more like,
mean,
it wasn't
Grizzlies
an elimination game for the Grizzlies. That was just like getting into.
Yeah, he was saying we wouldn't have made the knockout round if Book hadn't had the big game. Now we're really stretching it. Like, last night, including it's a stretch, but going into that Memphis, I agree. In the actual playoff elimination games, Devin Booker has played terribly, and he needs to play better in those situations for this team to win. There's no doubt in that. But last night was not an elimination game in my mind.
So Brian sent us 2. The first one Brian sent us said, not going to lie, Book being a front runner, getting annoying. And then the second one, they said, it's the numbers, who cares about the record?
I mean, I do. Like, I don't care if a guy puts up 35 points and loses by 20. Like, I don't care about that as much. Like, to your point, elimination games are not just about one guy. We've already acknowledged Book needs to be better. But in 2 of those games, the Suns were just getting their asses kicked. All 5 players, all 10 players that touched the court were getting dominated. Like, pulling a guy out and his numbers being low because the game was over by halftime. Yeah, I'm going to fault him more than anybody else because he's the leader of the team. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at averages, yeah, those averages are going to come down if you play like 20, 25 minutes because the game was over already. I don't care as much about averages. I care about what happened in the game.
I don't quite understand the front runner thing either. Like, this guy had opportunities to leave and go elsewhere, and
I think he's talking about like when the Suns are up in a series, that's when he plays good.
Oh.
When they're falling behind, that's when he falls apart. That's a front runner mentality as well.
Yes. Okay.